So, the Big Five personality traits are NEOAC. So, what these two authors are suggesting about the Big Five is that personality is structured among 5 dimensions, which is NEOAC. They argue that personality traits tend to be bipolar, with some people scoring on diagnostic tests at either extreme, so they can be high or low. The following make up the Big Five. So we always hear people call someone neurotic, right? She's a neurotic. And what that basically means is that that person is highly anxious. So if we gave a Big Five personality test to someone, and if they scored high, they would fall under one or more of these, categories. If they scored low, so if a person is highly neurotic or scores high in neuroticism, they tend to be anxious, temperamental, self-conscious, emotional, vulnerable. If they score low, they tend to be calm, even-tempered, self-satisfied, comfortable, unemotional. Extraversion is essentially being outgoing. So if a person scores high, they would be affectionate, joiner, talkative, fun-loving, active, passionate. If they score low, reserved, loner, quiet, sober, passive, and unfeeling. Now, I would score low on extraversion because I am a loner. I'm reserved when I'm in a room full of people, not because I'm afraid to meet people, but because I'm sort of checking people out. That's why I like to sit at the back, and I can get a full view of the room, and you see the personalities at play. Quiet, I will be quiet within an area, then sober, and then passive. I used to be passive because I grew up in an environment that required me to adhere, to obey. So therefore, when you are, and it was a strict environment, and so and could also be hostile. So then you develop a passive orientation to life. It wasn't until I started going to college that I began to become, I began addressing the passive aspects of myself, like people pleasing, right? Passive aggressiveness. When I began to address those areas, and then I sort of began reaching towards becoming more active, standing up for myself. Now that didn't happen until much later in life, but it is something that I do have a record of transitioning. Openness. So if you score high, you tend to be imaginative, creative, original. You prefer variety, curious, liberal. If you score low, you tend to be down to earth, uncreative, conventional, prefer routine, uncurious, and conservative. If you look at in both columns, prefer variety and prefer routine, variety could be like a number of things, but a lot of times when people step out of their marriages or long-term cohabitating relationships, it's usually because they want sexual variety. It's funny. I was watching Love After Lockup, and there was a person named Megan who was from Fort Worth, Texas, and she was meeting a guy who had, gotten out of prison, but he was married to someone else and had kids. And so he called himself wanting to propose to Megan. And Megan was a virgin. She was 28 years old and a virgin. And when they finally met, wherever he was, I think in New York, and they got together into the hotel and everything, he wanted her to strip in front of her. Now, she's a virgin. I'm not saying she hasn't had any exposure to, things or whatever, to, activities, but she clearly said that she was a virgin. So how is she going to understand how to strip? And so what it was is that he wanted that kind of variety. He was married with kids, out of prison, but he wanted to cheat and be with someone else. And that's why you may oftentimes find people who may marry, someone else simply because of the sexual variety. It could be curious as well. When it comes to routine might be more economic. So if a person leaves you, it's because you are taking them out of a routine. You can't keep a job. You won't even be stable for you. And usually women might let go of a man for that reason, right? They might put up with the man for a long time, as we have all done, but eventually the fact that you don't have any aim or ambition, or you can't stay on a job longer than 2 years, or you got to move from place to place all the time or whatever, that's going to bother a woman who likes predictability, who likes routine. I don't know about men because I'm not a man. I'm quite sure that they like some kind of routine. Men today want women to have jobs. It used to be that the man was solely the breadwinner and he wanted you to stay home to take care of the kids. Now today they want you to have jobs. And so they might prefer routine in that area, but they would prefer variety in the bedroom, however. Agreeableness. So if you score high, you tend to be soft-hearted, trusting, you're generous, acquiescent, lenient, and good-natured. If you score low, you tend to be ruthless, suspicious, you're stingy, antagonistic, critical, and irritable. I've heard a lot of comments about men that oftentimes when they are meeting a woman for the first time, the first thing they check the obvious aspects of that woman, if in terms of youthfulness, physical attractiveness, things like that. But they also check her personality and her attitude. And if you hear men talk all the time, they don't want a woman with an attitude. And so that means that the person with an attitude tends to be sort of irritable and critical and antagonistic. And the worst thing that a man wants when it comes to a woman is for that woman to be more aggressive. I said in a previous audio, I think under Not the Marrying Kind, part 3 or part 4, that female aggression is one deal breaker for a man. Could be probably the major deal breaker, for a man. I'm quite sure if the woman cheated on him, that he would have a problem with that. But it's nothing worse, I think, for a man to have someone with a bad attitude. For a woman, we tend to put up with a lot more because somewhere in the relationship we begin to become, a mother. We tend to mother the man after a certain time in the relationship. So we might interpret that as an opportunity to comfort, if he has a bad attitude, right? And that's where we might usually score high on agreeableness, because we might be soft-hearted, trusting, acquiescent. We're not going to engage his irritable mood. We're not going to antagonize him or whatever. We're just going to be more long-suffering until he does something so violent or something like that we have no other choice but to leave, right? But when it comes to a woman, however, men, I think that's on their top list, and I don't even think it's top 10. I think it's like top 1 to 5. She cannot have a bad attitude. Conscientiousness. So if you score high on conscientiousness, you tend to be conscientious. Conscientious is essentially doing what is right because right is right. So you need to arrive to work on time. That's in the rule book, but it should be obvious because you need to clock in right at the time of your shift. You shouldn't be surprised that if you clock in late, that your that your pay is not going to be docked, right? Hardworking, well organized, punctual, ambitious, persevering. And then if you score low, you tend to be negligent, lazy, you're disorganized, late, aimless, and quitting. And women here do have problems with men who don't have aim. I will say this. I don't know about men because I'm not a man. But I do know that women, if they have aim, now aim is relative. If the aim is to get a good job and keep a good job, stay on that job 20, 25 years and retire, okay, then that woman might have a problem with the man leaving a good job and going into business for himself. She can't see the vision of him becoming an entrepreneur and being successful if she's this type of woman, and she might actually exit the relationship, right? So she might have problem with his aim, even though her aim is still a good aim, because it's an aim to be stable. There's nothing wrong with being stable. People like to call stable boring, but it's always the boring. It is always the people who call the other people who are boring who always need help. You always end up having to take them in, right? Because they have lived for the day. They have been lazy, negligent and disorganized and late and aimless and quitting everything. They have done that from the time they were, in high school, early adulthood, all the way up to their 40s, almost 50s, and they don't have any sort of record of success. They don't have anything to lean on in terms of, savings or whatever, and they end up having to move in with you. So they like to call the conscientious people boring, right? But there's nothing wrong with that kind of aim to have a good job, things like that. But if there's an aim, say for instance, in my regard, I'm going to keep my job because teaching is a calling, but I also have entrepreneurial pursuits that I am interested in creating opportunities for people who are homeless, who are getting out of prison, and then people who are military in transition. So that's going to take planning. So I started out with a 7-year plan from 2013, and that plan was to change my economic position, my economic level. I had lost my job years ago. I ended up homeless, had to go into shelters, had to live with family sometimes, and I said, so from 2013, and I was in a homeless shelter at the time. I was in the Salvation Army, I think. Yeah. And so, and I was able to get on program, and I was able to stay there for like 6 months, right? The program was for 6 months. And so somewhere in between April and May of 2013, I need a 7-year plan. I need it because if you are having to live in a shelter, live with somebody, lose your job or whatever, you are literally below poverty level. I'm quite sure you may say different, right? Because if you're living in somebody's house and it's a nice house, how are you poverty level? But if it's not your house and they can tell you to leave at will, that's poverty level, right? And so I said in 2013, I'm going to establish a 7-year plan. And during that plan, I said I needed to create products in order to be able to help the people later in an advocacy role. I was going to, continue teaching and everything. And so my aim then was to create that 7-year plan. So it is now 2019. 2020 will be the accomplishment of that 7-year plan, provided I make it and I am alive. And then in 2020 is where I'm actually going to establish a 10-year plan. So when I met the guy that I met, he had no aim. He was, negligent, kind of lazy and negligent in his life. He can get a job, but he would not stay on that job. He would always complain. 6 months into the job, he's complaining about it. And so he had no real aim. He sounded like he did. He looked like he gave off the appearance that he did, but he had no vision. He was, disorganized. He was more successful at cheating and infidelity than he was in the other areas of his life. And I talked about that in reason number 8, that a person is, they are more successful at cheating than they are in any other area of their life. And so that was going to be an issue. I was hoping that he would turn it around, but he didn't. And he let cheating be the main force in his life. So therefore, he ended up having to leave. The cheating is what sort of kicked him out of here, out of my house. But I will, venture to say that the ambition was going to be an issue. Because had he stayed, he would have stayed with a good face, right? And then when the money came in, rolled in, he would then leave, take the money and go with his ex. And I saw the vision of that. So like I said, there may be two aims that are going on when a woman is deciding to leave someone or to, exit someone out of their life. If her aim is to get a good job, stay on that job, be stable, and the person she is with can't stay on the job for the life of them, she might leave that relationship, right? My aim in particular was planning and being a visionary and trying to go after something, but his aim was not that. He was just aimless. He just quitting, whatever. When it comes to a man, it depends on what the man values. If the man values a woman at the house, cooking and cleaning, washing and ironing, and he comes home for work and the whole house is in disarray, that might be a deal breaker for him. If he leaves her, I don't know if he truly loved her. It's hard to tell, but that may be a bothersome thing, right? When it comes to the woman being conscientious, hardworking, a deal breaker still might be if she is more available at her job than available for him. So she can be a high value woman who is, say, conscientious, hardworking, well organized, punctual, ambitious, and persevering, but the persevering might be so much to him to the point that he feels she's sort of competing against him. And if that's the case, if that's what he values and it is a problem for him, then he may exit that relationship. And that's all under conscientiousness.